San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
I want to welcome everyone to the San Diego Festival of Books. My name is Katie Walkiewicz. I'm an assistant professor of literature at the University of California, San Diego. This is the second year I've had the privilege of being a part of the Festival of Books, and every time it's such a pleasure. So very grateful to be back. And it's also my great pleasure to speak with our guest author today. Chang Rae-Lee is the author of Native Speaker, winner of the Hemingway Foundation Pen Award for First Fiction, as well as On Such a Full Sea, A Gesture Life, Aloft, and The Surrendered, winner of the Dayton Peace Prize and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And Chang Rae-Lee teaches writing at Stanford University. So again, such a pleasure. As I said before we started recording, I've been a fan of your work for a long time, so I'm very excited for us to get to talk about this wonderful new book today, My Year Abroad.
Nice to meet you. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you for being here.
Sure.
So I promise to keep my COVID-related questions brief.
What else is there to talk about? There's nothing else.
I know, right? I feel like it's like, what have you watched on TV? What has your COVID experience been? And what weird hobby did you take up? And right, but in all seriousness, one thing I thought about, in getting ready for today was how the experience must be different in, kind of doing the tour for the book online as opposed to in person. And so much of the book is about both travel, but also confinement in space. And I was just curious, like, how has this kind of shift to mostly online shaped your relationship to the book, to its launch?
Well, it's totally different, of course. I mean, the conversations have all been great. And in fact, maybe, normally I'd go on book tour and I wouldn't be in conversation with somebody. I'd be introduced at a bookstore or at a theater setting, and I'd give my spiel and there'd be Q&A. So there's none of that. There's no Q&A normally. But what I always did want was a conversation partner. So in fact, the Zoom part of that part of the Zoom has been great. And so I've really enjoyed that. And I've had great conversation partners. And the only thing I miss about it, I don't miss the travel. So normally, I'd go out for 3 weeks at a time. That's 21 days. And the last time I think I went out 21 days, I did 22 cities. So think about that. Think about all the traveling I had to do, every morning, get on a plane, every day, check into a different hotel. So that gets old. I do miss, though, having those meetings with old friends and then new readers. That's the thing that keeps you going on tour and really makes it worthwhile and real, because, sometimes you forget as a writer. I mean, I know it's crazy. It's a crazy idea, but sometimes you forget you have readers, actual readers out there who read your book and think about it and have questions. And it's kind of nice to be reminded that there's, so many wonderful, thoughtful, serious people who are, are taking the time to check things out. So that I miss too.
Yeah, I'm still sitting with 22, readings in 21 or 22, was it places?
22 cities in 21 days.
And instead now it sounds like you've had your own year abroad. And so I'm not doing that, but I can't imagine that's like pop star travel.
I mean, I think rock stars actually get to spend like a couple days or something.
Right?
Was recovering. I didn't need recovery so much, but it is great. And as I get older, it takes me a long time to write these books, and between books there's so many years, and so I'm so much older than I was like 3 books ago. that the body, I fear I probably wouldn't have been able to do it this time anyway. So,
well, and I was wondering too. You said that it's been fun to be in conversation around the books, or about this book in particular. I was curious if you could say a bit more about it. What is fun as a writer, or interesting to be able to dialogue rather than to kind of like, I assume you probably usually do like a mini reading, maybe do book signings.
We writers, most writers I think aren't really into marketing their books, aren't really into giving a spiel about their books, because once you start giving a spiel, it's necessarily, narrow and more narrow than you want. I mean, as I've always believed and I always read, novels should be about kind of everything. Even if it seems to be about one thing, it should be about a lot of things. And so I appreciate that in a conversation, we can go over a lot of things and I don't have to present some idea about the book, which, obviously bookstores and your publisher and everybody wants you to do. But, I'd rather just leave it to someone who's read the book, and then we could just talk about, anything we want. And also stuff that's maybe unrelated. I don't have to always be on point or quote unquote on message. There is no message. It's just the book. So that's why it's been more fun that way.
No, that's great to hear. And in some ways that is sort of in fitting with the novel, right? Where these things that seemingly have nothing to do with one another get interwoven or find ways to be connected. Mm-hmm. And I have a couple questions along those lines. My first question that's kind of specifically about the book was also to give a little bit of a summary for anyone who is already a fan of yours, but maybe hasn't read the book yet, and wants a little bit more context. But I'm going to try not to give too much away, which is hard because you create such exciting and engaging characters. I have questions that I cannot ask because they would be spoilers. But without giving too much away, my year abroad details the many encounters and what I would maybe even describe as misadventures of Tiller Bardman, which is the best name ever, I think, who's a young 20-year-old college student, and he kind of stumbles into this agreement to travel to East Asia with Pong Lu, who's a businessman, after meeting him, working as his caddy on a golf course. And Pong kind of imagines that Tiller seems kind of bored with his life and could do more, and sort of seduces him into this year abroad, which, Tiller describes to his dad as, going to Europe, but in fact takes him, throughout the Pacific and into East Asia. So you give us this beautifully textured world in the novel, which is not unlike, your other novels. But I was curious if you could say a little bit about the inspiration for the novel, and kind of what led you to this material in particular.
Well, it was definitely the character of Pong Lu, the Chinese businessman. He's modeled after a friend and acquaintance of mine who lives, back when I lived in Princeton, and I met him through our daughters. They were the same age, and he was just a really sweet guy. But once I started talking to him, I realized, and he was he had a day job at a pharmaceutical company as a science person, but then he had, a dozen other little enterprises going on the side. And, as if his job at the pharma company really didn't take up much of his time, or at least brain time. And so he had all these, interesting little businesses. He had, rentals, he had some eateries, he had some manufacturing, he did some synthesizing compounds that he had, outsourcing that to some place in China. And I thought, my goodness, I love this guy. And I loved him partly because it was really not about the money. I mean, I think he sort of delighted in the idea that he was just curious and thinking that, loved opportunity. And it was like, he thought it was just like, going through a door that opened out onto this wonderful, interesting world with all these people associated. And I thought, I have to write about this guy because, there's something about him that I just naturally, as an immigrant kid and an immigrant boy, I naturally have an affinity to that. But also, as I said in some other interviews, I guess I've been feeling myself a little bit, just maybe too settled, not in a doldrum, but just kind of, I don't know, just too comfortable in just the trajectory of my life, and maybe lost a little bit of that immigrant kind of aspirational energy and verve that I think my parents had, and my parents' generation, their friends had in that generation, and I was delighted by his energy. So the book was just going to be solely about him and that character. But then as it happens in the formation and development of a novel, before you start writing, is you really ask yourself a lot of questions like, well, why am I really interested in Pang? Sure, we can go on lots of fun adventures with him. We can learn a bit about worlds that we don't know, but what really is the interest? And that's what I think, as a writer, you have to do. You have to continually focus, continually hone and narrow your interest and your way through a story. Because it's not just journalism, right? And not to denigrate journalism. It's just not, I'm not just presenting some tableau. I have to also present my interest and obsession about that tableau, and through all the ways. And so that's where I came up with the character of this younger fellow, Tiller Bardman, someone who was really, kind of floating about, pretty bored with himself, not feeling very exceptional or interesting, and someone who was needing inspiration, needing, the fragrance of some new delight. And I think, and so in some ways, Tiller is me. I'm that kid, and I thought to myself too, I didn't want to write a novel where there's two middle-aged guys going out together around the world. I thought that'd be pretty dull. but creating a younger fellow who is me and not me, and someone who's emerging into a new consciousness and maybe a new idea of himself. That to me is just, and maybe that's what happens all the time when you're kind of renewing your vows about life and the world, which is kind of what Tiller is doing here. I mean, he's kind of a babe in the woods, being seduced by not just Pang, but by the world. And so I thought, he should be kind of just at the cusp of some big opening, right? Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because Pang is just it's hard not to fall in love with him as a character for so many reasons. And Tiller, I love his last name. Whether it was intentional or not, he can be both a bard and he can be really bored.
Yeah.
That about who he is, and sort of the questioning he seems to have about what does it mean to have a normal life? What does it look like, and what does it mean to settle? And so maybe connected that, one of the things that came up for me in reading the novel was the importance of heroes,
Yes.
either looking to people as heroes or wanting to be heroic in some way,
Yes.
which is sometimes juxtaposed with like business, which seems to be a really capacious term.
Right.
I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that. Was that intentional? Was it something that emerged for you in the process of writing? Because so much of it does seem to be about looking for, not only just seeking like a sense of self, but like who are people that we can emulate, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I realized that Tiller was really looking for. He was looking for ways to model himself, looking for ways in which he could imagine a different kind of human, expression, posture, outlook, stance. And that's why I think that's why I think we are all so enamored of the idea of heroes. That's, so much of our culture runs at sports, arts and entertainment, and especially like in the book, there's a scene about karaoke, and where, he always Tiller talks about how great his mother was as a singer, and he never sang himself. But just the idea that somehow there's something within us that maybe is a secret bit of genius, a secret bit of brilliance that we can tap into. And I think that's Tiller's looking for that. But I think the book suggests that maybe it's there for everybody, that even a guy like Tiller there, and maybe it's just my own view too, is that people, no matter who they are, do have these incredible capabilities that sadly mostly are untapped, even for the people who are quote unquote successful. And that we just need particular individuals to remind us of that fact, and to remind us too of not just our own, talents, hidden talents, but also that the world is sort of, it's made for us to reach into life and maybe, be inspired to do something special. Maybe not in a grand, like Nobel winning way, like Einstein, but in a way that, especially in this story, there's also kind of a quiet domestic story, that we can be heroes on just the smaller scale in ways that, that, let's say, like a kid like Tiller would never have conceived of before. But of course, he has to pay attention. He has to, take mental notes. He has to feel something, and then maybe something can change for him.
Well, what's one of the things I love about the novel is that it's sort of, even as Tiller is having these like life questions and is always self-professedly like bored and too normal, like, like the thing he seems most concerned about, the prose totally belies the truth. I mean, I think one of the things that's so pleasurable about the novel is not just the way that these characters, it's so easy to fall in love with these characters and get swept up into their story, but the beauty of of your writing and the way you describe these boring places like suburban New Jersey, right? Now, maybe it's because I'm not from New Jersey and I have kind of like an unhealthy, like romanticized idea of it. But
you might be one of the rare people who do.
I think maybe, this is the benefit of being from Oklahoma, maybe. But it just, there's something in both the writing that also reveals these like beautiful intimate moments between characters that I think is so telling. There were so many times, I think my compulsion as a professor is when I read, I always have like a pencil so I can mark lines. And as like a failed creative writer, lines sometimes I just think are pretty, And there were so many lines in the novel that I just kind of turned over, where you would even repeat words, but it would feel like we were cycling through something, and then you would show us that we weren't. We actually would shift to something else, which in some ways was also kind of Tiller's story, I felt like.
Yeah, well, with Tiller too, again, especially for me, I've always been, of course, interested in telling stories as a novelist, but without a sense of, the texture and tenor of the language that I'm going to use, and that language as connected to and exposing a consciousness, that is as important to me as a writer than as anything else. And so I really can't figure out the characters. Some people think, oh, you figured out the character and then you just have the voice. But in some ways, it's a chicken and egg thing. I'm not quite sure where it happens. Sometimes if I don't have a great sense of the voice and just the ways in which, I guess the diversity and breadth of that, say, that particular lyric mode, it's hard for me to really understand who this person is and why they're telling us their story, or their story is being told through them. And with Tiller, I really felt as if he is, on the outside, he does seem sort of muted or mute to the world, but inside he's got this whole symphony going on all the time, which is, I think a lot of people are like that. And so I wanted to give room for that orchestral, movement, or orchestral kind of, grandeur even though he's such not a grandiose sort of person. He's not grandiose at all, but I hope his soul is, and that's that's something that I absolutely wanted to get out about him, and the kind of person he is in the context of everything that's going to happen in the book.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to kind of go back to one of the tropes of the book. He finds that this is something I aspire to, but I do not have the singing capabilities of Tiller. He finds that he's actually a karaoke singer, not a
Yes.
karaoke enthusiast,
Yes,
right?
yes,
He
yes,
doesn't have to be the audience. He can be on the stage, even in his own, small way, in his own small, room or community. And so that's interesting. The last question, I think, or hopefully I might have time for two more, but one of the questions I really had for you was that, or was curious about, is that, we get these really rich characters, but one of the things that is so, that is just makes it such an easy page turner is that there's still so much that we don't know about them. There's so many that are kept from us as readers, and some things we learn by the end, some things we don't. And the question I had for you was, do you feel like you need to have all of the details worked out for yourself before you get to the end, or do you even keep some of those things from yourself in the process, right? I think, we've kind of hinted Pong in some ways is a very mysterious character. It's part of his appeal.
Yes.
Do you feel like you had to fully know him, or was there part of him that you kind of let him keep to himself, for kind of lack of a better way to describe?
No, I think absolutely I did know all of him, and in some ways I intentionally didn't go there in the conception of him. I knew so much about him, so I have a good foundation, I suppose, right? If you want to use that analogy, and maybe I can see the whole stick-built structure of it, but I don't know what that second floor and that roof is going to look like. And I think that for me, particularly in a book like this, which is about, as you say, adventure and misadventure, that there are going to be turns in the book. And that was, this book is, part of this, the genres in this book. I think there are a lot of genres in this book, but one of them is the picaresque adventure tale. And it's no good if you're writing that tale if you know every little move, right? Because then it becomes airless. It becomes something that feels a little preordained, and it maybe not explicitly, but I think the reader can always feel that. And so, and particularly about details about Pong and some of the other major characters, I wanted to discover them almost, just a little bit before Tiller does, to retain that sense of surprise, shock, sometimes just utter bewilderment and horror. Because this is sometimes a little bit of a horror story too. I mean, I've gotten word back from some readers that at certain points they were just really scared, which is good, because I was kind of finding myself scaring myself. So I was like, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? But I think that's what I understood from the beginning about Tiller, that he needed to be scared. And then, of course, that means, yes, not disclosing even to myself where things are going to go.
Well, it keeps some of the vibrancy alive too, right? Because part of what this business is about, that many people participate in the novel, is creating goods, usually like food and beverage, that's consumable to a U.S. audience. And so by the end, I started to have a little bit of an existential, oh gosh, am I also like the consumer for all of these things, right?
Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that as well, but it was one of the things I found really humorous. But sometimes there are some horrifying moments in the novel as well about that kind of drive to produce goods.
Yes. Yeah. And, that's part of another little thing I have in the novel, a little interest of mine, is just about consumerism and our hunger for things, and the sense that we're insatiable and we're always looking to fill some void or some lack, even though, of course, we're the most prosperous country in the history of mankind, civilization. And so I definitely wanted to, put that out and to, lampoon it a little bit, and also, in a satirical way, to show how far people can go in with the very best intentions, but that it can get skewed, and it can go very wrong in terms of our desires and our wants, and our just rapaciousness sometimes, and also leading to something more spiritual, are an obsession about things that really don't have anything to do with real life. It has something to do with just our fears of stuff, fears of death, fears of irrelevance, right? And there's some discussion of that in the book as well.
Absolutely. And belonging. I mean, one of the other things I was curious about was, in some ways you could argue that the novel kind of follows like a kind of, I'm going to hesitate to say, like, for lack of a more sophisticated way of saying it, like a reverse migration pattern in some ways, right? Where at first, part of the novel is set in Hawaii, and I thought, well, why are we in Hawaii? But then thinking about what Hawaii means in this kind of, like Pacific world was really interesting. And part of Tiller's journey is a personal one as well. It kind of how to grapple with his own Asianness in ways that he fears are not legible, but are also not like embodied in some ways. Like he worries, am I Asian enough? And so I was wondering if you could say a bit about if that was intentional, where, if you thought in advance maybe about where you were going to kind of carry these characters.
Well, I really liked your term reverse migration. I didn't think about that. That wasn't what, it was on my chalkboard, but it makes absolute sense in the ways that I thought about Tiller, is that he's going back to a place that he didn't really belong or come from, but that he feels an affinity for, and that's real enough. And there's a scene in the book where Pong and his crew of businessmen, they're Asian, and that's no accident in this book. The same way it's not an accident that he doesn't go on his semester abroad program in Barcelona or Edinburgh. It can't be in Western Europe. It has to be in Asia for him, because there's this tropism that he has towards everything's Asian, people who are Asian, and it's because he still has open questions about who he is. And I mean, the book isn't primarily that kind of drama, that kind of psychic and personal drama about who am I, but it's there. It's this white noise in the background that's always kind of giving him a little vibrato of wonder. And there's a scene in the book where they're in Hawaii, and they're kind of at a Korean style spa. It is set up where they're kind of huddled over and washing themselves, and he looks over at them. He thinks, is that how Asian men we Asian people should wash ourselves? Is that how I should wash ourselves? And he's not judging. It's just more, he's curious. And that for me was, just where he was, but it's also, my interest. And of course, I've written books about, identity and ethnic identity, of course, before, but in this book, I wanted, particularly in his character, with the character of Tiller, to mark out a different kind of relationship with ethnic identity, one that wasn't so tortured and maybe dramatic as maybe in some of my other books, but one that's, I think, still pretty primary to him. And obviously his mother is of Asian descent, and so he's working through a lot of different things about how, as you say, he belongs to himself. I mean, he feels like he belongs to society but doesn't have a connection with it, and so he's trying to figure out the ways that he fits in his own skin.
Yeah, and there, some of those things were very resonant for me as a reader, and his desire to, though, I'm going back to what you said about how he has all these things inside, but kind of making them legible outside of his mind,
Yes.
And he, in some ways, that gets us back to heroism, because he's often trying to enact these heroic acts or perform in certain ways to show, like, I am special, I can be trusted, I can be part of a group.
Yes. 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 Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's looking to be enlisted in a way. I mean, he's someone who's desperate to latch on, for lots of reasons, because he feels he's kind of orphaned by the death of, the disappearance, death of his mother. But also, of course, in cultural ways. in economic ways. And so he's I think for me, that was a notion that I was working through, is that, you know, some of the need and hunger that people have, at least that I was seeing it, is this need to find a community, you know, whether that's a community of 3 or 3,000, you know, that he was looking for something, or continental. He's looking for a way to, you know, to feel as if, you know, his stance is the one that is right. Of course, there is no right stance. You know, I think that question is, you know, clear to him by the end. But we never stop trying. I think, especially those of us who, you know, maybe didn't start out with a rooted sense of belonging. You know, we're kind of always wandering in the search of that.
And even in the way the novel is set up, you know, we have a present tense where he is in a domestic situation, mm-hmm. and is remembering back to his year abroad, and it is sort of a back and forth, a kind of, you know, working it through to try and find a way to kind of get to a place of stability. Yes. Which, you know, is also futile, as you know, as I think he learns, right? Like, there's something kind of nice about the banal normalcy of life that you know, can be on a smaller scale maybe than some of the grand stuff that he searches for early on. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a delight. I had so many other questions to get to, but I'm almost glad we didn't, because I learned so much about, you know, the way you put the novel together, and it makes me want to reread it all over again. Because, as I said, by the end of the novel, you know, I was really sad to leave these characters, you know, and I was also strangely interested in going to New Jersey. I mean, as well as the many other exciting locations that you go to in the text, but
it could be your destiny, Katie.
Right, there we go. Right.
But thank you so much.
Macau and New Jersey.
And New Jersey.
But thank you again. This was just wonderful. I just wanted to let our audience know that you can purchase Chang Rae-Lee's book, My Year Abroad, at one of the many incredible independent bookstores we have in San Diego. And I want to go ahead and name all of them so that you can support them, and so we can kind of uplift the great work they're doing of keeping independent bookstores alive. So you can go to Diesel, Mysterious Galaxy, La Playa Books, Library Shop, Run for Cover, Book Catapult, Warworks, as well as the UCSD bookstore to get your copy. And also, please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. And you can continue to join us for a full program of authors, panels, demonstrations, live entertainment, all kinds of exciting events for the San Diego Festival of Books. If you go to sdfestivalofbooks.com, you can get the full program. And again, I wanted to thank everyone who joined us today. And thank you so much, Chang Rae-Lee. This was such an honor and a privilege. As I said before, I've been a longtime fan of your work. So what a treat. And I'm really grateful to everybody who organized the event for today as well. So thank you. And I'm excited to see everyone at our other Festival of Books programming.
Thank you so much, Katie. You're great.